Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Sex and teens. The topic itself can be super uncomfortable, overwhelming, and even scary to both parents and adolescents. If you're a parent or a guardian, this episode is a must. So much has changed on the sexual landscape. There's porn, hookup culture, social media, and so many other influencing factors. How do you talk to your adolescent to keep them safe and making good decisions? What do they need to know? What do you need to know? Fortunately, here to answer these questions and so many more is one of the top experts in the world and a woman who has my utmost respect. Shafia Zaloom is the author of Sex, Teens, and Everything in Between. I loved this book, as did my wonderful psychologist wife, and we are not alone. The creators of the hit Netflix series Big Mouth, Nick Kroll and Andrew Goldberg, do their best to make the show hilarious, but they also consult with Shafia to make the show accurate and instructive. They've said that her book perfectly encapsulates her mission at the cutting edge of sex education, teaching adolescents how to become people of integrity with regard to sex and relationships. So listen in as Shafia and I have a candid and highly informative discussion about teens and sex. Shafia Zaloom, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So, Shafia, you are filling such a crucial need, and it is my wish that every adolescent had access to you. From my interactions with you, reading your book, and getting to know what others have said about you, you appear to have found your calling. How did you decide to specialize in health education and then to double down by writing a crucial book, Sex, Teens, and Everything in Between?
Well, when I was a lot younger, about 25 years ago, I was a social worker. And I worked in residential treatment centers for youth. As an alternative, it was residential treatment centers, kids in recovery as an alternative to incarceration. So dual and triple diagnosed kids who were drug addicted and wards of the court. And it was pretty intense work. And after several years of that, I realized I had a few experiences in particular. I realized I really needed to get into prevention versus interventive work. So in my own life, education and relationships had been super important. And so that pointed to health education for me. And that's what set me on the path to really pursuing a career in health education. And then for various reasons, I started to specialize in healthy sexuality and relationship education, specifically consent, as things in the national discourse started to shift and change and focus on that. And that's what's led me to write the book. I started consulting, going to different states, different parts of the country, doing a lot of parent education, teen education in different places. And people would say, do you have a book? Do you have something you can give us to continue with this work that you've started with us? And so that was really the inspiration for the book.
You know, one of the things I really appreciate about you is just something based on the idea of prevention versus interventive work. It appears, based on what I've read and what I know about you, that you try to phrase things in positive ways that would with greater likelihood end up with prevention rather than having to attend to a mess.
Well, in my work with teenagers, what I found, and I think this is true of all of us, right, that we're more apt to strive for something and aspire to something and respond more positively to something like that than if someone tells us what not to do. Yeah. I think that's helpful for kids is to understand what not to do because they are concrete thinkers. But what's hopeful for them is to have something to aspire to, so that when it comes to their esteem and that we're truly empowering them to do, they feel like they have a path. And kids eat this up because that's really all they need. For a lot of them, we just don't show them the pathway to what we're asking them to do. Instead, it's like, don't do this, don't do that. We're more reactive.
Yes.
proactive about what we're hoping they can achieve. And just by putting that in front of them, we're communicating that we believe in them. And that that's ultimately what this is about, that we believe in them and their capacity to do for themselves in a way that will lead to something healthy and productive. Whereas if we focus on what they're already doing as being negative and that they need to stop without providing them with that balance and belief, I feel like it's counterproductive in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. You give them the target. And I like that so much, rather than just say, don't go here. You say, go here. And one of your phrases that blew my mind was not just no means no, but rather yes means yes. And that might blow some people's mind. Can you explain the idea of yes means yes?
I mean, yes means yes is really about affirmation. It's about looking forward to something more positive, and that hopefully, especially when it comes to our relationships, that we're moving in those directions, that it's not about someone, feeling Now, I want to be really clear that no is an important word. And
definitely.
We talk in this
We're not replacing no.
Yes, that we have to be explicit within these contexts, because sometimes people will run off on that, like, oh, you're saying that no isn't important and that we should only say yes and that there's pressure to say yes. And we're talking about consent. Someone should be able to say no. And of course, absolutely. No is an important word. It's one that I talk about. Refusal skills are paramount in keeping people safe. But when, we talk about what we're aspiring to, that's where we start to use yes, and that people appreciate yes, kids in particular. As a parent myself, I am always looking for the opportunities where I can say yes as much as possible, so that when I say no, it's honored and respected, and that there's something that's specific there, that I really mean something seriously, and that kids need to listen. And that when we go to yes means yes within the context of relationships and sexuality, we're communicating to kids that actually this is a positive and good thing, that it's okay, that we're not stigmatizing it, we're not shaming it, but what matters is what you do with it. And so we want to be affirmative with what we do with it. We want people to, be affirming their desires, be able to communicate what they want and need, that ultimately that is what leads to positive relationship building, which is what we're trying to do.
And I like the idea of yes means yes, because you also mentioned in your book that sometimes when you're in the act, you're like a deer in the headlights and you can't say no. And the absence of no does not mean yes. The absence of no actually could mean no.
Yes, absolutely. And that we cannot make assumptions. And I don't know if you picked up on the book, I allude to this activity I do with the kids called Think of a Bear.
I loved the Think of a Bear. Let's talk about Think of a Bear.
Yeah. So, with adults too, I do this activity where, I'll encourage them to think of a bear, an animal, the bear, because sometimes when you're talking about sexuality, people think they're naked. But we're talking about a bear, and everybody, I encourage everyone to see it in their mind's eye, think about what it's doing, what it looks like, where it is. And then when I start asking people about their bears, we realize that everybody has different bears, that they are polar bears, brown bears, black bears. They're in the forest. They're on an iceberg. It's the stuffed bear that you had as a child that's sitting on your bed. It's gummy bears, Yogi the bear, Smokey the bear. There's so many different kinds. And when then you process it with people and ask, so what's the takeaway once we start talking about it? Because we could have a superficial conversation about bears, right? Like there are some common things to bears that we could probably all agree upon.
Sure.
But when it comes to, what really matters, there's all these important details and differences amongst our bears. And, I try to use concrete examples to illustrate concepts of healthy relationships and sexuality to kids. And it helps them realize that everybody might have a different bear and it may not be the same as yours. So when it comes to relationship communication, it's think of a bear. You have to remember that you may not have the same bear. You may be thinking of a black bear and someone's thinking of a koala bear, which isn't even a bear. It's or a panda bear, which some scientists think are raccoons, and so it's so important to find out what someone's bear is and not make assumptions about it. And when you ask, well, how would you know what someone's bear looks, sounds, and feels like? The obvious answer is you'd have to ask. And that's an important segue into the concept of consent and sexual communication and really understanding each other on an authentic and connected level.
Yeah. And authentic and connected feels like it's the theme throughout your book, really being authentic with oneself, being authentic with another, having a genuine connection and not just using each other as tools. Kind of I don't know if you're familiar with Martin Buber, but he talks about the I and thou relationship, the sacredness between two people rather than I and it. And it sounds like you really rock that idea in your work.
Well, I'm trying to humanize sexuality as much as possible and relationships and the benefits of them for young people, because I feel like, the current narrative in the culture today is to disconnect. And there's a lot of focus on objectification and dehumanization when it comes to our bodies and our sexuality. And so in creating that counter narrative, definitely trying to encourage kids and give them the tools by which to initiate authentic connection and cultivate authentic connection in their lives, which ultimately lead to substantive and meaningful relationships, which we all long for. So yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah, that appears to be the highest aspiration in life. It's what we talk about on our deathbed is the relationships that we've had, that they do appear to be the most meaningful thing. Shafia, obviously we can't go into the depth I would if this were an 8-hour presentation, but let's talk about the dreaded talk, also known as talking to children about sex. Parents generally find the experience a bit cringy, and their children do too. And yet communication around these tough topics is so crucial. How can parents have a more effective exchange or series of exchanges with their children about sex, safety, porn, social media, and everything else to help keep children safe and able to make good choices?
That's a really big question.
Hello.
I think, and you're asking that, I think that people feel most overwhelmed and experience a sense of paralysis with when it comes to having these conversations. And so just like you would advise your kid in a homework situation that felt overwhelming or whatever else, you want to chunk it up, right? So start with the basics in the beginning. And, that typically is then to realize this is not one big talk that everything is riding on. This is actually a series of small conversations. You're scaffolding, think layers, like layers of an onion, and you're scaffolding things across time, and then you're going to hang things on that scaffolding along the way. So it's really about, a values-based approach and finding opportunities where you can insert a value, make a comment in a way that's non-judgmental. So, in particular, I think it's really important that parents realize we're not delving into the nitty-gritties of explicit sex, at least not yet. And we have to maintain a parent's child boundary, but that we're really looking for opportunities to talk about how people treat each other, because ultimately that's what matters the most. And so when you're watching TV together, when you hear a certain song on the radio in the car together, when a story comes out of school or you hear about something in the news, it's really an opportunity to ask a strategic question or make a comment where you're leading with, I notice, which is non-judgmental, or you're asking a question that leads with what or how, not why. Because that also, if you ask why, you've made a judgment already. And kids are so sensitive to that. But rather, how do you think that made them feel? Or do you think they both got to walk away with their dignity? And hopefully you get a question like, well, what does dignity mean exactly, right? And that's it. You can leave it at that and realize that there will be more opportunities and that you're building this over time. It's not something that you're saving for one perfect moment. In which you load everything and you have all this, you put so much pressure on yourself. It really is about collecting smaller moments across developmental stages.
There's so many, as you're talking about values and imbuing the conversation from a perspective of values, I'm thinking of a few that might come to the fore, such as courage, authenticity, kindness, curiosity, social intelligence, respect, honesty. Are those the types of values that you're talking about?
Absolutely. Because really they're fundamental to our relationships in general. And we can use all of the positive relationships that kids may have in their lives already with us or with other people as examples in which we can highlight the importance of how we treat each other. And if there's some that I would highlight in particular, I think is respect. And I think that we need to be explicit about that, because always I can walk into a classroom of, if I'm doing a workshop abroad, like 100 kids, and I'll say, how many of you have been taught to respect yourselves and others like your whole life? Mm-hmm. Every hand goes up. Because truly, as parents, I think we all want to raise our kids to be good people. But then I'll say, with all the 100 hands up in the air, I'll say, who can give me a definition? All the hands go down. And, if this, and then I say, okay, well, let's figure out what that actually means. What does respect actually mean? And a few brave kids will start to raise their hand. A lot of times there is a misconception that the golden rule, which has value, but that we treat others how we would want to be treated, is what respect means. And that's actually not true. Respect, and true respect, is treating others how they want to be treated. And that's the think of a bear conversation, because when you have to figure, how do you know how someone would want to be treated? You have to pay attention and you have to ask if you don't know. And so, I think it's important that not only we talk about these values, but we remember that kids don't necessarily understand entirely what that means, what these sort of abstract concepts mean. And we have to make them concrete for them and talk about them explicitly and what the embodied and emotional experience of them is in relationships. So I would do that with respect. Mm-hmm. I would do that with empathy. I would do that with dignity, and I would do that with integrity. Those are sort of the four that I really focus on in my teaching, because I think they're fundamental and so important to healthy relationships and cultivating the capacity for kids to actually practice consent, because there is a difference between knowing and doing. And so to empower a kid to do what they know and have learned about consent, in all their relationships, and it's at work all the time in our lives, they actually have to have that character building foundation of understanding what those values actually mean, and have some sense of, understanding what they look, sound, and feel like in those relationships they already have.
What I love about this approach that you have is there's so much early intervention going on with really good methods to have outstanding relationships. I talk about, instead of the golden rule, the platinum rule, which is exactly what you've just said: do unto others as they want done, and believe them when they tell you that that's what they want, that their idea of a bear is totally different from your idea of a bear. It may seem absolutely fantastical that somebody could actually think of that version of a bear, but believe them when they say that. Maybe challenge it only if you know for a fact that their bear is going to harm them immediately or somewhere down the line. But I love that idea. And one of the things I also get from you is that wording really matters. The way we say things matters. And of course, we're not going to say things right. And one of my favorite axioms came from one of my supervisors was, it doesn't matter what you say or do, but it matters how you talk about what you've said or done. So if you've said something incorrectly to your child during one of the talks, go back, readdress. Is that consistent with your idea?
Absolutely. I actually think that is such a gift. It really is a huge opportunity. So in our culture, what is pervasive when it comes to, our belief around vulnerability is that vulnerability is weakness, when actually it is our greatest measurement of strength. And so, and it's required for building healthy, authentic relationships. And so in that moment, you can actually, when it comes to parenting, the most powerful parenting is actually modeling what we're trying to teach them to do. And so in that moment, when you make a mistake within your relationship with them and your communication, to be able to go back and to say, I thought about this again, and I think I was wrong in how I presented it. or I think I made a mistake, or I think I could have done this better. And here's how I've thought about it. And this is what I really want you to understand and to know. That is amazing. Because what you've role modeled for your kid is healthy vulnerability, that we are all human, that no one is perfect, and this effortless perfection that our culture expects in all of us is actually not what leads to authentic connection. And that this is how we reach out to each other. This is how we have conversations. And that, some of the hardest conversations are the most important ones to have. And that we know this, anybody who's in a sustainable relationship knows that that's the key to sustaining those relationships that mean the most to us, is that when things get difficult, that we actually communicate with each other to figure out how we're going to move forward in a way that honors each other's truth and our connection. And so absolutely words matter. And that doesn't mean you have to perfect it the first time around. It just means that as you have these conversations, you stumble through them, you wrestle through them, they're awkward, that you're able to say that you're able to talk about it, that you're able to ask and say, how's this coming across to you? Does this feel like I'm being judgy? Because I'm really not intending to. How can we talk about this in a way that's going to feel right for both of us? And that's ultimately what we want them to do in their relationships moving forward. What a better person to practice with than the people who love them the most and are entrusted with their safety.
So powerful and so relational based. I mean, you're really looking at imbuing skills that later on will relate to their significant others, to their friends, to their colleagues. These are really, really important. They transcend the sexual realm profoundly. I'm thinking about a great quote by Donald Winnicott, who said that he is a psychoanalyst from England, really active in the 60s. I'll paraphrase what he said, that psychological health can be demonstrated by allowing another to know you and having the space to know another. And I love that yin yang, that kind of upload, download that you are dialing into in your approach, the ability to know oneself and to know another person through empathy, through authenticity, through integrity. These are the greatest gifts you could possibly give a child, I think. So Shafia, what are some common misconceptions parents have about talking directly with their adolescent children about these topics?
I think the primary one that I hear about the most is the assumption that tends to be pervasively perpetuated that somehow if we talk to our kids about these things, that then they're going to go out and do them.
Right.
And there's actually no empirical evidence whatsoever that proves that. In fact, the inverse is true. That the more we talk to our kids in direct, honest, medically accurate, straightforward, values-based ways, the greater the probability that they will embrace their bodily and sexual autonomy, that they will pace themselves and make better decisions that are in the interest of their sexual and relationship health, all those sort of things. And that, all you have to do is look at the Dutch, because the Dutch do this from the beginning, and their kids are far more relational and responsible when it comes to sexuality than their American counterparts. There's decades of research. You can look it up really easily. And true to in our own country around the studies people have done around sexual health, in particular, comprehensive sexuality and relationship education, taking a positive and proactive stance with it, will in fact ensure that your kids will be more able and want to balance responsibility and joy and pleasure, which is ultimately what a healthy relationship is all about. It doesn't mean that they're going to go out and suddenly start doing just because you're talking. And when I bring that up with kids, they look at me like I have 5 heads, and they actually find it quite amusing. They're like, "Are you kidding?" And we have a good laugh over it, and then we get pretty serious to say, so what does that mean for for you all, for us, as a culture, for young people who are about to navigate the sexual landscape of our American culture? Like, what does that mean? And what do we need? And how can we be proactive? And where can you get your information? All those sort of things. So it really is, they hear that and suddenly they are motivated more than ever to educate themselves and to realize that this is a positive and good thing when we talk to kids about all this stuff, that it's not something that will lead to some sort of demise of their moral compass.
Totally. It does not lead to nefarious behavior, and the inverse is true. I love that fact. I imagine similarly, teens themselves, because they're under such a deluge of information, are under the belief, erroneously perhaps, that they know more than they actually know. And I'm wondering, what are the common gaps between what the teens think they know versus what they actually know?
I think the primary one is they think, well, there's a few. And it's developmentally appropriate. It's where they are neurologically. And I think we all went through that. And I think there's some of us who still are. But, the older I get, the more I realize I really don't know much. And I'm inspired to learn a whole lot more. It's humble pie every day.
Totally.
But, so when it comes to kids, I think adults and young people alike really consistently overestimate how many young people are actually sexually active within something called hookup culture. So I think that there's, a big awareness around hookup culture these days, which basically means, in the spirit of Think of a Bear, hookup culture, the common denominator, because there are a lot of different interpretations of what that means, is that, well, there's hooking up and there's hookup culture. So a hookup is a sexual encounter in which there's no expectation of a relationship. So it's really purely for physical gratification. More often than not, young people, teenagers in particular, if they are participating in some sort of a hookup experience, it doesn't tend to be about physical gratification so much. It's more about conquest or social notoriety or social currency, or, because it's clearly public. It's
right.
hot for gossip.
Almost exhibitionistic.
Yes, for sure. And then there's hookup culture, which is pervasive. So what's overestimated is how many kids are actually hooking up. Hookup culture is pervasive and everywhere. And that is the notion that, yes, most people are hooking up, that all they want is this very impersonal sort of sexual kind of experiences. And that this is the way to go. It's sort of glorified, and it's more about performance and conquest than it is about felt experience and connection. So, people greatly overestimate how many kids are actually participating in hooking up within this hookup culture. So right. That's one. The other is that they understand and know what good sex is. And I think this is one, as parents, we really need to offer an alternative understanding of what good sex is, or I should say good sexual activity, because the majority of people, when they hear the word sex, think of something very specific and narrow that has to do with genital intercourse.
Right.
And then I'm really talking about sexual activity
totally.
In general. And what positive sexual activity is. And the misconception there is they think that, it's just about getting off. It's just about how many people, you can hook up with. There's a new term now that's quite concerning to me called someone's body count, which is their sexual history and who they're hooking up with and who they're not. Just think about that word, body count. Yes. And typically in the other context it's used in is like war. Is like
exactly. That's where it's how many people we've killed.
Yes. And so, do they have, and they'll say, we do gender exercises for girls. The double standard is you can't have a high body count. You have to have experience, but not a high body count. Like I'll hear that. So in class when we're talking about this stuff, and we'll have to pause and say, let's talk about the language for a second. Like we do a lot of activities around that too, but kids and their understanding of what good sex actually tends to be pretty one-sided. It doesn't include reciprocity. It's very performance and conquest based, and doesn't include a lot of the incredible sort of beautiful human elements to connection and expression when it comes to sexual activity and intimacy. So that's a biggie.
Totally.
And that is why it is so important that we be talking to our kids about this, and in that aspirational way when it comes to loving, caring relationships. And that's not to say that's all they can have, or that's all they should have, or that that's all we expect from them. But to help them understand the value of that for themselves, and for others who will have importance in their lives.
I'm just thinking about what you're up against at times as a sex educator for teens. There are terms in the zeitgeist that you just mentioned, body count, for example, and music reinforces the idea of really making it a transactional approach. So many songs. It seems almost like there is no other type. I'm just remembering back in our youth, for example, we had, was it Total Eclipse of the Heart was a song. You're not going to hear that these days at all. And I'm just thinking about, how do you sell the idea of relational sex when so many reps of music and Kardashians and other things are coming into their psyches saying, no, actually it's body count. Actually, it's performance that matters. Actually, it's whatever will get me up the social chain that matters. How do you sell the spiritual aspects of human connection?
I mean, ultimately, and I have to say, it's interesting. And this is where the counter narrative is so important, and where we want to teach kids to be filters, not sponges. We want to give them the tools to actually deconstruct what they see in media, to think about it critically without criticizing, because we don't want to alienate them or isolate them from us. We want to stay connected. And remember, we're role modeling the very thing we're hoping they're going to emulate and they're going to seek in their own relationships, where we need to respect their emerging independence and independent thinking, but then also be the parent. Because they got plenty of friends. They don't need any more friends. They need a parent. And if no one is going to create this counter narrative for them, who is? And so, as parents, that's where we have the opportunity to step in and to say, and to wonder, to be curious, and to actually allow kids to be experts in their own experience, and then to ask questions that will help them think about and reflect upon it in a way that empowers them to make these conclusions for themselves versus us trying to impose it on them. So, really what you're trying to do is help them think about these things by asking those strategic questions, by providing them with information, and then allowing them to be the expert in their own experience, to educate you on some things and engage in those reciprocal dialogues that will help them understand that there are alternative options. We do electronic journals in my class. Before they were written journals, but times have changed. Totally. And in those journals, I can say, of the thousands of kids that I've taught and worked with over 25 years, I have not come across a journal where a kid, no matter what the gender, no matter what the demographic, has not identified longing for connection first and foremost, or that they that's what they're seeking, that they want a sense of belonging. And a sense of belonging, whether it's in your relationship with another person, within your family, within your smaller communities, within the greater community that you live in, a sense of belonging is about people honoring your truth and who you are authentically, versus, like fitting in, where you strategically change yourself to be accepted by this greater majority or to fit into whatever it is you're trying to do. And so they long for connection and a sense of belonging. And that is something that I think we underestimate.
That is so profound and so consistent with everything I've studied in terms of how we as a social creature, because social creatures really need connection. And our brains haven't evolved so much that we've become AIs. We are we are actually we are actually meant to connect, in spite of what the music might say, in spite of what media messages or what they see on porn. We are meant to connect, and the fact that you see that consistently in the journals, that a total eclipse of the heart is still relevant musically, at least in their psyches, even if they haven't heard the song. Let's really go into. Oh, and by the way, I just need to repeat something you said because I loved it so much. That that we're looking to make them into filters, not sponges. That is so profound and so just on point. I've not heard that. And I love the idea of being curious about the child's experience, really almost visiting a foreign land, as if we're visiting a foreign land as an anthropologist, saying, hey, let me get to know you. Let me get to know the lay of the land. Tell me, you're the expert on where you live. That's what I was getting from you.
Yeah, I mean, they have a power that none of us adults will ever have. And that's to know what kids their age are up to and doing when the adults are not around. And so if we want insight into that and to actually have substantive conversations with them, we have to allow for and create the space for them to educate us on what's actually going on, so that what we address and what we talk about is real and relevant to them. And it's really important that we understand the awesomeness of whatever it is that they're drawn to, that they're navigating. And we won't know that because we're not of this generation unless they tell us. And so I think that's really important. And in a way, it's also honoring, and saying, as a parent, you're communicating when you do that. You're saying, okay, this is something I don't know. And I know it's something you do. And I know it's something we need to talk about. But it really gives them the opportunity to speak their truth, to explain the bear. Because ultimately that's what it's all about, right? Like, we're trying to model that. Like, tell me about your bear. Where does it live? What does it look like? What is it doing? And what does it feel like for you? What is that emotional and embodied experience like? I had a kid. It was amazing. Every now and then kids just stop me in my tracks with what they write or what they say. And, it was during a time when I was about to do a parent education evening for these students for their parents. And I said, what's the advice you have for these parents about what it's like to be a teenager and how they should approach these conversations? And one kid said, pay attention more to how I feel than what I do. And I was like, that is it. And I put that up on a huge slide because that was so important. The other one that stopped me in my tracks that I like to quote a lot and is in the book was a young woman who said, she wrote to me directly in her journal. She said, Shafia, if the adults don't take our relationship seriously, how can they expect that we would? I mean, this is out of the mouth of babes, right? Like, they're so thoughtful and they're so perceptive if we just give them the chance. And so I really use those as ways to teach parents, because we're allowing kids in those moments to be the expert of their experience. They have so much wisdom to share with us. And as parents, I think also, we're so focused on what do we need to address that's problematic and challenging and difficult in your world, where we really need to be building credibility by asking them about what's really like, what is drawing you to this? What is the awesomeness of this? Like, how come this is being given so much attention? What is it about it that you're so drawn to, without immediately stigmatizing, shaming? There's that expression, don't yuck people's yum. Like, we got to figure out what that actually is for these kiddos so that we can engage in meaningful conversation. Otherwise, they're just going to tune us out. And what we have to say is not going to have any direct relevance. So why would they remember or listen to it? We wouldn't do that, right? So, when it comes to that sort of thing, that's what I'm really hoping people will take away and be encouraged by, is that we can have really positive, constructive conversations where then our kid walks away and is like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
Exactly. And that really could increase our confidence just in the knowledge that is a likely outcome. What you were speaking to was the old axiom of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you said it so much better and so much more. It was just so pay more attention to how I feel over what I do. And I felt this jerk in my tummy because I'm remembering as an intern, a huge mistake I made. I was working with somebody in a gang, and he and I were doing very well. He was on probation, and we were really establishing a nice therapeutic bond. And he came to a group meeting, and he pounded on the door really hard. And I went out and I said, please knock again and knock gently. Now, what I did was technically correct, but what I missed, and I only knew this years later, and I wish I could have corrected it, even with a conversation with him. I didn't have the insight or the awareness at the time. But I share this in hopes that people will recognize within themselves this mistake. I lost the therapeutic bond at that moment. He was knocking with exuberance for being there, and I missed it. So, it changed the course of our relationship. That I missed that. Wish I could go back in time and redo that. I did technically, according to the playbook, the correct thing by correcting his behavior, but I missed out on the emotional part.
But then your intuition clues you in to that learning, right? And so I think too, when we also encourage our kids, but do this ourselves, are more intuitive about how we parent and more intuitive about our relationships, that we pick up on those nuances that are so essential and important. Because a lot of the time we're so focused on what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. Or like with parenting books, you're just always looking at the book, but you're not actually looking at your kid.
Totally.
And that it really has to be a combination, right, of both things.
Yeah, the shoe must fit the foot. We don't try to make the foot fit the shoe. And so I'm totally with you. Let's go into porn. It's so readily available, and it can be overwhelming. Quite literally, it can be an assault on children's psyches, and it can harm healthy sexual development. What can parents do to reduce the harm that porn may cause?
I think that it's really that conversation and having the talks with them that help them understand it from a critical perspective, so that they have the capacity to critique their behavior versus feel shamed and shamed by it. I think first and foremost, when we enter into these conversations, we have to be explicit about the fact it's completely normal and natural to be curious about porn,
right?
And to identify how pervasive it actually is, and that for us as parents, we want to engage in a conversation to understand that more and to provide information to kids, because a lot of them are learning about sex through pornography, and that is not a quality sex education that will lead to healthy relationships. And so when it comes to porn, it's actually a really good way to talk about a lot of other concepts in sexuality and relationship that we want to get at in a more positive way. And there are a variety of ways in which I enter into this conversation, depending on the age of the kid. Typically, middle school is the time that you want to start it, depending on, and again, you have to have a sense of what your kid's seen, what they're exposed to, how much they're exposed to, how much leniency do you have when it comes to the internet, when it comes to technology, how much oversight do you have? Because the age by which, kids are coming across pornography is quite young. And depending on the study you look at will tell you different things. And that's coming across, not necessarily initiating looking at it for their own pleasure. Because a lot of times kids will come across it when they just Google something.
Right.
Like they want to see images of cute kitty cats, and they Google kitty cats and something happens to come up. Right. So, typically the early teens, adolescent years are when kids come across pornography. and you want to be proactive about that. Amaze.org is a great resource that has scripts. I did a video with a script too of like how you would actually have this conversation, what you would need to say. There's a whole chapter in the book on it, because pornography is a hard one. It's really difficult, and it's very different from how we were when we were growing up. In some ways, I mean, porn is still porn. But, I like to liken learning about sex from pornography to like learning how to drive from watching the movie The Fast and the Furious, or to learn about physics from watching the Transformers. Like it's not an effective educational tool. It's purely for entertainment.
Totally.
And you can approach the conversation from that perspective. And ultimately, and whether you're pro-porn or anti-porn is pretty irrelevant when we're talking about children, when we're talking about kids, and their developing sexual identities. And brain development. And so it really is, helping them understand that the type of internet porn, it's really internet porn that kids are watching, the free stuff, places like Pornhub and things like that. Is that they've got to understand it's typically contractual, not necessarily consensual, that it's a very narrow representation of sexuality, that it's someone else's fantasy, and that actually the healthy sexuality for us comes from our own imaginations, and exercising our own imaginations within that context. And that for sure, it's not representative of most people's healthy sexual practices, in particular. And how much you go into that will depend on how old your kid is, what's appropriate. It's so important to have parent-child boundaries as a part of this conversation. Kids do not want to talk explicitly about their personal porn use with you, and I actually think we should honor and respect that. What they do need from you is important information about positive relationships and how pornography is not representative of those things. And that too much porn, right? There's like what we see, how much we see, and our own response to it, how much we seek it out. It's really important that kids understand that too much is not healthy. And can have some real negative consequences down the line in terms of their sexual functioning, their capacity to have intimate relationships with real people. When it comes to sexual activity, if they try to recreate what they see in porn without understanding the concepts of consent and things like that, they could really hurt somebody. So it's important to understand and have perspective on what's real and what's not, and what we're actually aspiring to in real life.
It's interesting, in my literature review, porn-induced erectile dysfunction was discredited as an idea. And yet in my clinical practice, I've seen so many young men who are unable to have sex due to the fact that they're so used to the feel of their own hand, or that they have these sexual fantasies that are based on someone else's fantasy, as you just said, or that they're anxious about performance for a host of reasons, and that they're not going to measure up, quite literally and figuratively, to the images they've seen. So I have seen the deleterious effects of long-term porn engagement that is too much. I think there is, to your point, probably a just right amount. And it probably varies from individual to individual, depending on how susceptible they are to a host of things. But I like your idea of, you implied that there's a right amount, perhaps, and there's too much.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and I don't know that I would ever say there's a right amount, because it's actually illegal to show young people or to encourage them to see sexually explicit images.
Right.
And so, for me, it's sort of the same approach when it comes to substance use education, right? Like, you want to take a harm reductive approach. It is important for kids to understand it's illegal for them to watch pornography under the ages of 18, and that there's some real reasons for that, and that they should understand what those are, that they should be informed in their decision making, and that as adults, we have an understanding that it's pervasive and it's out there, and that they may be compelled to watch it. And a lot of times in privacy and that we don't have control over that. And so what is the information then that we can provide them with so that they can make decisions for themselves that will be in the interest of their overall health and well-being? And so I think that's really the important piece. I mean, I have kids come into my office who will say, who I've worked with in workshops and in different parts of the country, who will be so compelled to say, I mean, this is weighing on kids' minds too, because to approach me to say, my penis is broken, I don't know what's going on. I'm scared. I can't do this. I can't do that. Like within this culture that really rewards hypermasculinity, to talk to your teacher about something like that as a young man who's struggling, I think is indicative of how much this weighs on them, and how concerned they can be around this sort of thing. And I get a lot of anonymous questions too, like, what is too much? How do I know when it's too much? How do I know when I'm harming myself? And that's such an individual thing. And so kids really need to have these ongoing conversations about health in general and how things are going, but also not just have one porn conversation, but to check in from time to time. The other thing that people are surprised by is that sometimes, more young girls are coming across pornography, or young women are watching porn. Typically, and it's a very gendered kind of binary thing, and typically, girls are watching it for other reasons, to see how they should be responding in a sexual encounter, because they're not actually experiencing pleasure in the ways that they think they should be, and it should be more exaggerated. And so they're looking to see how they should act, or they're doing research to try and understand what boys want and will please them, and will use that then as a yardstick for their own pleasure. Like, there's a lot of different reasons. Some of them are actually using it to explore their own sexuality. Some of them are also, self-pleasuring at the same time. Sometimes I hear about, boys will say their partners who identify as, who are female, will say things that are similar to what they see in porn, and get completely overwhelmed, and suddenly will lose their capacity to experience pleasure, erectile dysfunction, those sort of things, because they're it's just a lot. It's so overwhelming for them. And suddenly they feel like, wait, am I expected to be performing like what I see in pornography? So it's complicated, and there's a lot to it. I think as parents, we just have to help kids understand that we're aware that it's there, and provide them with the information they need, and the encouragement they may need to make healthy decisions for themselves, and give them alternatives. Kids need to, these days, kids are so floored by the concept that they could actually use their own imagination when it comes to sexual fantasy. So, ultimately, it is developmentally appropriate for teenagers to explore their sexuality with themselves or other people, as long as it's consensual, as long as it's on their terms, and there is sexual autonomy being practiced on both sides.
Totally.
And so kids need to understand too that as a part of that, sexual fantasy is a normal thing when it comes to the teen years, and that it's okay to have a sexual fantasy as long as you don't act on it in a non-consensual way. And kids need permission for that sometimes, because there's this culture that's telling them, porn, and everything else, which is all someone else's imagination. Right. It's not their own. And so they need to understand that that's actually a normal, healthy part of sexuality. The other part of it is we tend to focus on porn. There are plenty of sexually explicit, objectified, dehumanizing representations of sexuality in mainstream media all the time.
Can you give some really good examples that kids can see?
I mean, we just talked about it in music, right?
For sure.
And then in terms of TV, even shows. So part of this is, if you are an adult and you're watching these shows that are targeted at adult audiences, you probably have an experience. You can be assumed on the part of the show, for instance, that you have an experiential context in which to keep these images in perspective.
Right.
When young people are watching those images or binge watching these series and stuff that are meant for adults and have adult representations of sexuality, they don't have that experiential context or perspective to understand or be able to make sense of what that means. So something as simple as Grey's Anatomy, for instance, and the relationships and sexuality that's represented there. That's an older show. There are shows that show that Westworld, Game of Thrones,
wow.
In particular, right?
Right. Oof.
Yeah. So, I mean, you see rape in those shows too. And in many ways, the non-consensual sexual activity, the illegal sex, the rape, it's normalized in some of these shows, and kids watch it and they'll binge watch it. But they're not adults with the same sort of perspective and cognitive understanding or capacity that we have. So we have to be talking to them about that. Again, filters, be able to critique and deconstruct media in a way that they can make sense of how things are put together and impacting them and influencing them in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, that prefrontal development that you're describing and just having more trips around the sun in life is so crucial. And I think that, to my earlier question about the gap between how much teens might think they know versus how much they actually know, is really dependent on the number of trips around the sun and their prefrontal, which neither one is really as online as one would like. And if these neurons that are firing together do wire together, I'm really geeking out here, but that's how I think. When they wire together early, for example, learning the platinum method, what a great thing. When they wire together early, watching porn, learning about objectification, what a bad thing. And that will require a lot of effort to untangle over time, and which leads a lot of people to come see someone like me to help them in that pursuit of a more relational experience in life, which is what we all hunger for to begin with, just as you said. I want to go with an idea of connection. You've mentioned that your work isn't just about consent, but it's really about love and connection. What are your favorite ideas about cultivating love and connection?
Well, again, this is the piece that I think is really important, that we underestimate how much kids want to understand and know about caring, loving relationships and about romance. Not in a way that's cheesy, not in a way that is, sort of sarcastic and making fun, but truly intimate. And that caring, loving relationships are in many ways the foundation of what keep us well in our well-being, right? Like that keep us connected to the world, that keep us mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, physically healthy. I mean, we know this. There's decades of research that proves it, that the quality of our relationships are what determine the quality of our lives.
Totally.
That, love is such an important aspect of our existence as human beings and plays into that sense of belonging, not only in a sense of belonging within ourselves. Self-love is huge too, and such an important thing to cultivate and help young people cultivate within themselves, so that no matter where you are, you feel a sense of belonging because you love yourself. And so there's a variety of ways I think it's important to put love in front of kids. Not only that self-love and how we take care of ourselves and how we find a sense of belonging inside of who we are, but that also how we treat each other matters, and that love and caring, there's a difference between being in love and being loving, feeling loved and, sharing love, all those nuances of this state of being.
Yep.
Because a lot of people mistake it for like a relationship context, but it's really an emotion. It's a state of being. It's about connection, and context has everything to do with that. But it's different. And so, really talking to kids about that, I think, is an important piece, and putting examples, highlighting examples of that is so important for them, because it's something really beautiful and amazing to look forward to and aspire to. And again, it's sort of, we're coming back to those first questions about, being preventative versus interventive.
Exactly.
Is like, set them up for love. Because if you ask any kid, it's amazing. If I ask a classroom of 15-year-olds what they value in their relationships and how they want to characterize their relationships in 10 to 15 years, right? Which is when they're 25 or
exactly,
so.
Yeah.
And I ask a room full of adults who are in their 50s, 40s or 50s, what they value in their relationships and how they characterize their positive relationships, it's all the same. The responses are all the same. Loyalty, honesty, joy, communication, caring, trust, all those values that we talked about. There's no gap in what kids want and what adults want and have discovered they need. And so, from the beginning, to point kids to that, to highlight that in the relationships that they have in terms of what they want and need, that this is what we all want and need, right? And that ultimately is what we're going for, and what we're hoping, with their neuroplasticity and going back to our geeky brain stuff, and their brain development and myelination, that they're establishing patterns of behavior now that will determine who they are and what their relationships will be like then. And so, getting them to buy into that, and to understand what they're going for by pointing to the emotional embodied experience of that, I think is true. Tolstoy, I have this quote that I love to open my classes about love on. Is, if there's many, how does it go? Oh, if there are many minds as there are heads, then there are many types of love as there are hearts. And, just helping kids to, and there's no definitive answer in so many ways. This is an ongoing, lifelong process. And when we're in class, I'll say, okay, so what have we figured out about love so far? Right? Because we're all on this journey.
Wow.
Albeit in different places in the path.
Wow.
But,
what a great question.
What have you asked that of a kid? What have you figured out about love so far? And I want to pause to acknowledge and take a moment to say that there are some children in our world who have not experienced positive care and love so far. And so when it comes to those kids and or those adults, or whatever the age of those folks, is in that moment, one, to be cognizant of that and to realize you don't want to set someone up, right, to trigger trauma or to do any of those things. But to then, ask those questions with sensitivity, sometimes with professional context, but to say, that's out there. It's hopeful you can cultivate this within yourself. Let's talk about how we can find it. Let's talk about ways we can build it in our lives, because we are all capable of it in a way that is hopeful. But if you have a kid who has experienced trauma, who doesn't come from positive relationships, it is important then to resource that child and to get them help and to get them support in a way that's professional and therapeutic, feels supportive within their school environment, that kind of a thing. I wanted to pause on that because I don't want to.
Very important piece.
That everyone and every child
exactly
has the benefit of a loving relationship in their lives.
What are some of your favorite just generic tips that a parent can teach a child?
I think that when it comes to healthy relationships and sexual activity, it's really important that, so we've talked a lot about what we want them to aspire to in terms of what's healthy, because that helps them understand when things aren't right. Right. So I think for parents, it's not so much a word or anything like that, but more of a skill, which is to engage in reflection and listen to intuition. So to be able to quiet ourselves and the sort of gremlin voices that are in our ear that get us to second guess our intuition, and to practice with our child, identifying that feeling in their stomach, the emotional embodied experience of what they know to be right. And just drawing connection to that first. And then when that is challenged, in moments when it is challenged, for parents to strategize with kids and to identify what are the things that get in the way of your ability to listen to your inner voice. And then what are some tools, Lisa Dumore just called toolbox for troubled times. What are the tools that you have? And what are the strategies you can come up with to deal with those obstacles so that you can make decisions and do things that are true to yourself? Now, as a parent too, it's always important that we allow kids to have fallbacks, healthy fallbacks. So we teach our kids to be honest, but sometimes it's okay to be dishonest for a higher truth. And that higher truth is our intuition and keeping ourselves safe. So you can say, oh, it's my parent, or I need to get home. My mom just texted me and, she did whatever, or have a safe word. So with my kids, when they were younger and they go for sleepovers or something like that, our safe word was our family dog. And they would just say, so just calling whatever. Oh, do I hear Daisy in the background?
That's awesome. That is so great.
They dropped that word. I knew something was going on and they wanted to be extracted in a way that allowed them to save face in the social landscape. And so I did what I needed to do as an adult and a parent who had the confidence to be able to do that, to allow my kid to do what they needed to do to feel safe.
I love that.
I did that with my kids always when they would go to parties as teenagers, right? When they got older. My kids are 19, 17, and 11. And, when they were older, same thing. They could always use me as the fallback. And I would go and I would show up and I would, say, text in that moment, I'm here, I'm outside. You totally didn't do X, Y, and Z, or the family was coming over. I told you, why didn't you?
You're so busted.
You're so get in my car and be the mean mommy.
I totally,
because they needed
so awesome,
but they didn't feel safe.
Exactly. That's brilliant.
And that was our contract for okay, I'm going to let you go out. I'm going to let you do these things as long as I know, as I can trust that when you need to, you're going to pull that ripcord, right? Where is my parachute? I'm coming in and I am going to be the fallback.
I love it.
And I think that we need to come up with those for our kids. So that's sort of 3 safety tips in one.
That's so good.
The other is our kids need to know refusal skills. In a sexual, when they're in a sexual situation and they don't feel they can manage what's going on, they're not comfortable with it, and they're trying to manage what's going on, they need refusal skills. Columbia University came out with a study last year that showed those kids who had some form of comprehensive sex education that included refusal skills, their incidence of sexual assault went down by 50%.
Wow.
That is so significant. So they need to understand and know good refusal skills for different levels of intensity when it comes to sexual activity.
I almost feel like refusal skills as a second language needs to be taught.
It does.
So it's repeated enough so that when they're in the moment in vivo, that they're able to execute. Because when anxiety goes up, functioning tends to go down, and it needs to be just really repeated and
practiced. So within different contexts. So I have, my kid, as you can imagine, my daughter, when I sent her to college, I felt confident that she knew how to manage and, engage in and use her refusal skills within a sexual activity context. She SOS texted me and was like, Mom, there's this girl and she's on my bed. She's on my bed. She's coughing. She's digging into my Cheez-Its. Her roommate just tested positive for COVID. What do I do? Which is an issue of consent.
It's entirely.
But because she still has a developing brain and it's a different context,
exactly
different to her. And so we actually have to go over refusal skills in a bunch of different contexts. She's like, Mom, you've got to write about this. Can you do an article? And I did. It's on Grown and Flown. But
Grown and Flown.
Yeah, you can find it on my website on how during COVID, how we need to talk to our college students about consent and, how to manage these situations and teach consent within this different context.
Totally. Context switching is so crucial here.
It's crucial. It feels very different to kids in different contexts. And so how do my skills transfer to different contexts back?
Exactly.
And we have to be really concrete about that. So that's another piece.
We're so wired to conform, and we're so wired for yes, that to override it.
They are neurologically programmed to seek the acceptance of their friends. And when I deconstruct, and FaceTiming with the other girls who were in the room once that girl left, who was sort of notorious for barging in, for never knocking. She was very sort of socially popular and very nonchalant. Oh, I don't have it. It's fine, whatever kind of thing, which made the girls second guess, right, their intuition. It's a great example of how that voice comes into your head of, well, we're trying to make friends. We're trying to build a social life here. Everybody likes her. She's telling us we're making too big of a deal about this. We want to be chill, right? But their intuition was telling them she needs to get out.
Totally.
Because COVID is literally in the room.
So tuning in is so big for you.
It's
and
so
really
important.
being able to listen well to that part. I can't think of anything more important. Almost. I used to think of this as being like Despicable Me with a whole bunch of little minions living inside of us.
Yeah.
Turns out the cells of our bodies rejoice when we represent our bodies well, and they actually tell us to go to hell when we don't.
Yeah.
We get sick. Our bodies tense up. Our immune systems go down. It's just, it's crazy. Oh my God. In addition to being the health educator at the Urban School in San Francisco and the author of an amazing book, you've consulted with the creators of 2 blockbuster shows that deal with teenage sexuality, Big Mouth and Pen 15. As an adult, I find both shows hilarious and profoundly poignant, and I so wish they'd been around when I was a teen. Can you talk about the work you've done with these shows?
Sure. So Pen 15, I've commented on a lot in radio casts and stuff because they're clustered with Big Mouth a lot
Got
of the time. Shows that had recently come out that addressed adolescent sexuality. And so I've been asked to comment a bunch, but I have actually consulted with the writers of Big Mouth and with my students too, because they're very interested in talking to kids about what's relevant. And you'll see too, they reviewed my book. They're awesome. I love working with those creators and writers, Andrew Goldberg, Nick Kroll. I mean, they've been phenomenal. Jeez. It's been an incredible opportunity. And, their questions they have great questions that center around what's relevant. They love talking to young people to really understand how they're thinking and feeling about what's going on in the world, and how then to creatively integrate that into their seasons and their episodes. I have some real favorites too. And so I just really appreciate that. I think it creates, a piece of media that is rich with opportunity to have these discussions with your kid. Media is a great way to enter into these conversations because it doesn't feel so directly intimate. And so there is that degree of separation. You can talk about the characters like they're real people. You can engage in dialogue that kids will really get into and want to provide their own insight into. So, well-placed strategic questions at a good pace. Your kid may let you watch that show with them. They may not. Watch it anyway, so you can engage in the dialogue. Media is just a great way to do that. And I think Hormone Monsters and the very positive way by which the show addresses what's real in an honest and raw way will very quickly get you into conversation that is addressing what kids are wrestling with currently on a daily basis. Sure.
So great. So great. And I just love the show. So thank you for consulting with them. And
people should be forewarned. A lot of it's super cringy. So
totally cringy.
I find
it's totally cringy. I find myself closing my eyes oh no, this is not happening.
Yeah, no, it's super cringy. So you may not want to watch it with your kid, but you could say that you could handle watching it on your own, but are really curious about it and want to know their take, right? There's all these different ways you can use it. But adults need to be warned. it's super cringy. I did a bunch of presentations with Common Sense Media, and we used pieces from Big Mouth because I had worked with the writers and they gave us permission, and we were deconstructing as adults certain pieces that I had gleaned and picked out to practice. And, there was one woman, she was fantastic, and I really appreciated her honesty. She's like, I couldn't get past it. I just couldn't get past it in my mind. And I really, my heart went out to her, and I said, I know some of it is just so cringy. It's just too hard. And I said, the key is to actually just, narrate your experience for your kid, ask them what the awesomeness is, highlight the pieces you can tolerate and where you find the value. And maybe ask your friends, because then afterwards I said, well, what passage was it? What moment? And then I said, well, here's what I would put, here's how I would deconstruct that piece. Here's what I would focus on. She's like, oh, I never even thought about that. I was so wrapped up in my own visceral reaction that I wasn't able to see it. So watch it with a partner, watch it with a friend who's an adult, have a discussion first,
yes,
and then talk to your kids. That's what I would suggest.
It is quite a deluge, and it's so brilliantly done. For me, even the cringy stuff is totally worth it. I love working through the cringe, and Maya Rudolph and Jordan Peele and so many other great voices just make that show just the most hilarious thing ever. I'm going to close with a final question, and that is, if you had and I think I know the answer, but I still want to ask, if you had the magical power to confer on all humanity one piece of knowledge or a skill that would be tremendously helpful, what would it be? And what do you imagine the effect would be on the individual as well as society at large?
I don't know if it's the current context, but right now I'm all about choosing love. Radical love. Because there's so much that's wrapped up in that. Although, competing with that would be dignity. My big mission has been to resurrect that word and concept in our culture that I think has been lost. And that treating each other with dignity is fundamental to all healthy, authentic relationships. And that success in relationships is not about getting someone to say yes or getting someone to see your way or whatever it is that most young people think. It's really about both people being able to preserve and feel a sense, preserve and practice and feel a sense of dignity, which basically means treating each other like we have value. And for me now, though, the word I'm going to pick is radical love, and that we all need it. We need it more than ever now, and that we do have the power, at least in our own relationships, to choose it. There are a lot of things that people don't have control over. And for us, I think it's really important that we find the ways in which we choose love, we encourage love, we cultivate love, and we put it up in front of our kids in the best way we know how. Because I think that that's what's going to save us in the time that we're living in right now, is choosing love and not only caring for ourselves and loving ourselves, but caring for and loving others as much as we can.
And I'm inferring that radical love means always as much as possible, going to love.
Going to love, finding love, even when things are despairing and difficult and hard, to find the love and to keep working for and towards love. That ultimately, that's where I want my energy to go, where I hope my kids will find themselves. And that, I hope all young people will be able, there's so much in terms of cancel culture and calling out and all these different things. And when it comes to kids, I really try to encourage calling in. Adults, it's a little more complicated. And, a lot of my work is about ethics and social justice. But when we're talking about teenagers and we're talking about relationships and we're talking about sexuality and the ways in which they develop those relationships, not only with themselves, but with others, it really is about love, calling people in, finding the love, celebrating the love, embracing the love, choosing love.
Shafia, I am all in. So thank you so much for taking time to share your wisdom with my listeners. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for your interest and for having me. It's been so much fun and a pleasure.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.